Before we begin, I offer this with care. The story you're about to hear isn't easy. It treads softly through quiet spaces filled with longing, sacrifice, and the hidden layers of love that don't always fit into tidy categories. If stories of deep emotional bonds, blurred lines, and the need to feel seen stir something raw in you, I understand if you choose to pause here. But if you stay, I promise to tell it with honesty, grace, and restraint. It was morning. Quiet. A kind of quiet that made sound itself feel intrusive. Claire stood in the kitchen, her fingertips trailing the cold, polished surface of the granite countertop. The house was still. The hum of the refrigerator was louder than usual, though nothing had changed. Maybe it was her. Maybe it was everything she had carried to get to this place. A house. A quiet neighborhood. Stability. It looked like peace on the outside, but inside her, the echoes of survival still lived. The years hadn't been kind. She had raised her son, Evan, alone. There were no dramatic exits, no heartbreak scenes. Just absence. Evan's father had slipped away from their lives like a breath lost in a windstorm. Before Evan could even walk, there had been no room for weakness back then. They moved from one small apartment to another, stretching every dollar until it broke. Claire remembered nights on a second-hand couch, staring at unpaid bills with her chest tight, hoping Evan wouldn't catch the fear in her eyes. But he always did. Even as a boy, Evan saw her clearly. He would crawl into her lap, rest his head against her shoulder and whisper, "We're okay, Mom." And in that moment, somehow they were. Their bond was forged in small spaces and big silences. In apartments with thin walls where secrets couldn't be hidden, so they gave up trying. They talked. About everything. About nothing. Evan asked questions most children wouldn't, and Claire answered without flinching. There was an unspoken agreement between them, honesty above all else. And maybe that was why, even as Evan grew older, he never pulled away. While his friends explored rebellion, Evan stayed close. He liked being home. He liked being around her. They talked. They laughed. His jokes were terrible, but his laughter was contagious, and Claire laughed too, not because the jokes were good, but because he was. Still, something in Claire had begun to shift. It started quietly, as all meaningful changes do. She had begun to take care of herself again. Not for anyone else, not even for Evan. For her. Mornings were for running, for breathing deeply, for remembering her body as something strong, not just functional. She lifted weights. She stretched. She ate food that made her feel good, and it worked. Slowly, the fog she hadn't noticed began to lift. She felt awake, whole, visible. People noticed. Evan noticed. And Claire, for the first time in years, noticed herself. She bought the house, a place filled with light and space and silence that didn't echo with absence. It was hers. She didn't apologize for it. She had earned it. Then came the hot tub. It was a splurge, sure. Maybe even a little ridiculous. But after years of going without, Claire had decided to say yes to something that was only for comfort. For once, indulgence didn't feel like guilt. Felt like healing. She told Evan about it before she ordered it. He nodded, smiled faintly, told her she deserved something nice. He didn't react much, but that was okay. She had bought it for herself. The first night it arrived, she slipped into the water and stayed until her fingers wrinkled. The warmth wrapped around her like a promise she hadn't realized she'd been waiting for. And yet, something in her stirred. A soft eagerness. She wanted to share it with Evan. Not because she needed him to approve, but because he had always been part of every milestone. Even the quiet ones. "You should try it," she had said casually over dinner. Might help your muscles recover. He shrugged. Maybe. But later that night, after a second glass of wine, she asked again. This time he said yes. She hadn't expected it to mean anything. Just a quiet moment. Just mother and son, relaxing under the stars. But when she went to her room to change, something in her hesitated. She reached for her swimsuit, a simple bikini she hadn't worn in years, and paused. In the mirror, she adjusted the straps, brushed her hair. Nothing extravagant, nothing inappropriate. And yet she lingered. She told herself it was the hot tub that made her nervous, that it had been a long time since she let herself enjoy anything. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she poured their drinks and carried them outside. Evan was already in the water, leaning back, relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in a while. His eyes were half closed, the steam curling around his shoulders. Told you it'd be nice, she said, stepping in carefully. He glanced up briefly and gave her a small smile. They sank into the warmth side by side, steam rising, silence growing. It wasn't awkward. Not really. But it wasn't quite the same either. Claire found herself laughing at his jokes again, leaning into the comfort of familiarity. And yet, something lingered under the surface. A tension too soft to name. Not dangerous. Just new. She dismissed it. Let the water hush it away. After all, it was just warmth. Just closeness. Just two people who had been through everything together, finally allowed to exhale. Just that. Nothing more, right? The next evening, the air held a trace of spring, that early promise of warmth returning. Claire stood at the kitchen sink rinsing 2 glasses. She moved with care, as if handling something delicate, though there was no clear reason for the gentleness. The house was silent again, save for the soft shuffle of Evan upstairs. She changed into the same swimsuit, not because of vanity but because it had become a symbol, a small ritual of claiming space for herself. When she stepped outside, Evan was already there again. Leaning back, arms resting on the edges of the tub, his eyes closed to the stars. For a moment, Claire simply watched him. The way the rising steam caught the light. The outline of who he'd become. Not a boy. Not a stranger. Someone in between. She slipped into the water beside him. It's still perfect, he said softly. Even better tonight, she replied, settling in. They spoke little at first. Just the sound of water moving as they shifted, the occasional clink of glass against glass. And then laughter. Familiar. Gentle. They reminisced about the cramped apartments, the years of shared meals and shared worries. Evan told a story about his friends getting into trouble, and Claire laughed with genuine delight. Felt easy. But Claire was aware of something else too. Not discomfort. Not desire. Just awareness. The awareness of a shift that had taken place. A closeness that had deepened not inappropriately, but undeniably. It was the kind of connection born from surviving something together. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but settles in the quiet between words. Thanks for this, Evan said, breaking the pause. Claire turned to him. For what? The house. The space. This tub. It's not really about any of that, I know, but it feels like we've made it somewhere. You know, she nodded slowly. We have. Their eyes met. For a breath longer than normal. And then, as if aware of the boundary neither of them wanted to cross, they both looked away. Claire took a sip from her glass, the warmth in her chest not just from the drink. It was the comfort of being known, of being seen, and in that steam-lit silence, she remembered what it meant to be whole. The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm. Claire and Evan shared easy routines, dinners, laundry, short walks when the weather allowed. The hot tub became a quiet fixture in their lives, like a candle left burning in the background. Not always needed, but always ready to welcome them. One evening after a long workout, Claire returned home later than usual. Her muscles ached in a satisfying way, and she moved slower as she climbed the stairs. Evan was in the kitchen when she entered, filling 2 glasses with water. He offered one without a word. She took it with a grateful smile. "Rough day?" he asked. "Good kind of rough," she said, leaning against the counter. "Everything hurts, so I must be doing something right." He chuckled, then paused. "Hot tub tonight?" She raised an eyebrow. He hadn't suggested it since that second evening. "Sure," she said. "Just give me a few minutes." Claire changed, this time slipping into a soft robe over her swimsuit. She caught her reflection in the mirror. Her hair was messier than usual, her face pink from exertion, but she looked alive. Outside, the sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of amber and lavender. Evan was already in the water when she arrived. Claire dropped the robe and stepped in without hesitation. The warmth hit her instantly, wrapping around her sore limbs like an embrace. She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "This," she murmured, "might be the best decision I've made in years." Evan smiled. "I won't argue." The conversation came and went in soft waves. A shared memory, a teasing comment, silence again. But it wasn't just silence. It was awareness. Claire noticed how Evan had grown into his frame, how his features had sharpened with time. She remembered the boy he had been, but the man beside her was no longer a boy, and she wasn't just his mother in that moment. She was a woman who had known loneliness, a woman rediscovering herself. She shifted slightly, letting the jets target a sore spot in her lower back. The water moved, rippling between them. "Want to trade spots?" she asked lightly. Evan looked at her. Something flickered behind his eyes. Then he nodded. They switched places. The jets hit just right. Claire let her head rest back, eyes closed. A sigh escaped her lips. "You always find the best seat," she teased. "That's because I let you take it from me," he replied, his tone light. She opened her eyes, met his gaze. There was a beat of quiet amusement. Then something else. The moment hovered, balanced on the edge of something neither of them could define. Claire pulled her gaze away first, letting her attention drift toward the stars. "I used to look up at the night sky when things got hard," she said quietly. "It reminded me that the world was bigger than my problems." Evan leaned back. "Do you still do that?" "Sometimes." He nodded, his eyes following hers to the sky. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't intimacy. It was the edge of comfort, where trust begins to feel vulnerable, where presence feels like a question you don't know how to answer. They stayed in the water until the chill in the air grew noticeable. Claire stood first, wrapping the robe around her shoulders. Evan followed a few moments later. "Thanks for tonight," he said as they stepped inside. Claire paused at the doorway and looked at him. "You don't have to thank me for being here. This is your home too." He smiled, soft, almost hesitant, and for a moment, the house felt fuller than it had in years. The next few days moved quietly. The weather stayed warm enough that the windows remained open, and with each breeze came the scent of early blossoms. Claire busied herself with small things, organizing drawers, refolding towels, and wiping countertops that didn't really need cleaning. Anything to quiet the thoughts she didn't know how to name. Evan was around more. Not intentionally perhaps, but noticeably. He lingered in the kitchen, made extra coffee, folded laundry that wasn't his. Claire noticed, even if she didn't say so. One afternoon, she reached up to a high cabinet and felt the stretch in her back. She winced, shifting her weight. Evan, who had been reading at the kitchen table, glanced up. "You okay?" "Just sore," she said, exhaling. "Leg day." He grinned. "Brutal." "It's a good kind of pain," she said, smiling back. Later that evening, as the golden hour faded into dusk, Claire stepped into the living room, tying her robe around her waist. Evan looked up from the couch where he was scrolling his phone. "Tub?" he asked casually. She hesitated just for a breath. Sure. The ritual had grown familiar now, a quiet comfort. But as they both stepped into the water, Claire sensed something different. They talked as usual, memories, nonsense, little things that didn't matter. But between sentences, there were moments of stillness. Moments where Evan's gaze lingered a fraction longer than before. Moments when Claire became aware of her own posture, her own breath. At one point, Claire shifted slightly, pulling her wet hair over one shoulder. Evan turned his head, quickly looking away. Claire said nothing, but her heart fluttered in response. It wasn't overt. It wasn't wrong. But it wasn't nothing. "I used to think," she said suddenly, "that once Evan turned 18, everything would feel easier." Evan turned to her. "Did it?" She laughed softly. "No. Just different." He nodded, thoughtful. "You ever feel like we skipped something?" She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. Like, everything was always about surviving. We didn't get the simple stuff. The boring stuff." Claire felt something tighten in her chest. "I know what you mean." There was a pause, long enough to feel deliberate. Then Evan chuckled lightly. "We're getting pretty good at boring now." She smiled, but her gaze drifted. The water rippled between them, catching the soft light from the porch. Claire adjusted her position, and their knees brushed under the surface. Neither moved. She felt the flutter again. She glanced at him and he looked back. For a moment, neither looked away. Then Claire leaned back with a small breath, reaching for her drink. "Careful," Evan said with a grin. "You almost look too comfortable." She chuckled. "Maybe that's the goal." He raised his glass. "To comfort, then." She clinked hers against his. "To quiet moments." They stayed like that, beneath a sky turning indigo. Not saying too much. Not too little. Balanced somewhere in between. A glance. A breath. A pause that asked no questions and promised no answers. Just the warmth of water, and the quiet acknowledgement of something unnamed. That night, sleep came in fits and starts. Claire lay awake, staring at the faint shadows on her ceiling. The warmth of the hot tub still lingered in her limbs, but her mind was restless. She replayed the glances, the small silences, the soft brush of knees underwater. Not inappropriate. Not wrong. Just something. In the morning, she told herself it was nothing. She went for a run, hoping to shake it off. The air was brisk, biting at her cheeks, and her breath came in steady rhythm. But even as her feet pounded the pavement, her thoughts returned to Evan's gaze. How it had settled on her with something unspoken. Curious. Soft. Uncertain. When she returned, Evan was already at the table, cereal bowl in hand, reading something on his phone. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, wiping sweat from her brow. Nothing felt different. And yet everything did. Later that day, Claire stood in front of her closet, reaching for something casual, but her hand hovered. She chose a sweater that fell just off the shoulder. Comfortable but deliberate. They didn't use the hot tub that night. They watched a movie instead. something light, a comedy neither of them had seen. But Claire didn't follow the plot. Her thoughts were elsewhere, half in the room, half drifting toward that unnamed place that had begun to live between them. Evan laughed at something on the screen, glancing over to share the moment. Claire laughed too, but she wasn't watching the movie. She was watching him. She shifted her legs, tucking them underneath her. The couch creaked. Evan didn't move away. They sat like that until the credits rolled. "I should get to bed," Claire said, her voice softer than usual. "Yeah," Evan replied. "Me too." They stood at the same time, and for a breath, they faced each other in the narrow space between the couch and the hallway. "Night," she said. "Night," he replied, but neither turned. For a second too long they stood there. Just two people shaped by the same storms, searching for language they didn't have. Then Claire smiled gently, stepped aside, and let the moment dissolve. Upstairs, she closed her bedroom door with a careful hand and leaned against it. She didn't feel shame or fear, just a quiet, pulsing awareness that something within her had been stirred. A longing not for anyone in particular, but for the sensation of being seen, truly deeply seen. And maybe she thought that was all this was, not a line to cross, but a mirror, reflecting the ache of her own heart. The next few days passed with an odd sense of awareness, like moving through a dream where everything looked the same but felt different. Claire noticed how quiet the house had become, not in sound but in weight. Something unspoken hovered just beneath every shared glance, every gesture that lingered longer than it should. They were careful, both of them, deliberate. Evan stayed helpful. He offered to cook dinner one night, his version of a stir-fry that turned out surprisingly good. Claire laughed as he fumbled the soy sauce, and for a while it felt like old times again. But even then, there was a tension in the air, not uncomfortable but undeniably present. A sense that neither of them quite knew how to name where they stood. Later that evening, they returned to the couch, sitting farther apart than usual, as if distance could undo awareness. The television flickered, its light brushing against the walls. A scene in the film mirrored something too close. A character caught in a moment of unspoken intimacy, a breath away from stepping too far. Claire felt Evan shift beside her. He didn't say anything, but the way he sat, rigid, thoughtful, made her glance over. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice low. He nodded, then paused. I keep thinking." "About what?" "About us. About this. Whatever this is." Claire inhaled softly. The words didn't shock her. They echoed her own thoughts. "I don't want to misunderstand anything," he added quickly. "But I also don't want to pretend I don't feel it." There it was, the truth finally spoken aloud. Claire turned toward him. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." A silence followed. Not heavy, not explosive. Just full. Evan looked at his hands resting on his lap. "It's not about doing anything. It's just that sometimes I feel closer to you than I've ever felt to anyone, and that makes me question everything." Claire placed her hand gently on the cushion between them. "It's okay to question," she said. "What matters is that we're honest, that we stay grounded in that." He looked up. There was no longing in his eyes, just confusion and relief. Claire continued, "This bond, it's strong. It always has been. But maybe we're feeling things now because we haven't let ourselves feel much at all for so long." Evan gave a soft laugh. "That sounds about right." They sat there, not moving closer, not pulling away. The weight of their honesty hung in the air, and with it came something rare. Clarity. Claire offered a small smile. "You're allowed to feel, Evan. So am I. What we do with those feelings, that's where our strength will be. He nodded. And in that moment something shifted again, not forward, not backward, but inward. A deeper understanding. If they dared to look, really look, they would see not a mistake, not a boundary crossed, but two people navigating a wilderness of emotion with open eyes and trembling hearts. It happened on a Saturday, the kind of quiet day where time forgets to move. Claire had spent the morning organizing old boxes in the garage, dusty memories tucked into cardboard, toddler shoes, school drawings, a photo album they hadn't looked through in years. She smiled at a picture of Evan, missing his 2 front teeth, holding a paper crown he made in kindergarten. The past felt close, tender. That afternoon, Evan offered to help her set up the new reading lamp she'd ordered. Nothing complicated, just a floor lamp in the corner of the living room. Claire sat cross-legged nearby, flipping through the instruction manual as Evan tightened the final screw. When he stood up to plug it in, the room briefly dimmed as his figure passed in front of the light. Claire looked up, and for just a second their eyes met. Something hung between them. A moment with too much silence, too much softness. She looked away. "Looks great," she said, forcing a smile. He returned it. "Yeah, good corner for it. Want coffee?" she asked, already walking toward the kitchen. "Sure." She brewed a fresh pot. Neither spoke much. When the coffee was ready, they sat in their usual spots. Claire on the armchair, Evan on the edge of the sofa. Close but not too close. The air felt warm. Or was it heavy? She could feel it building. A gravity between them. Then without warning the lamp flickered. "I think it's the bulb," Evan said, standing again. "Maybe it's loose." He moved behind the chair, adjusting the socket, his arm brushing Claire's shoulder as he reached over. It wasn't intentional, but it wasn't entirely accidental either. Claire inhaled. She didn't move. Evan lingered just a moment longer than needed. Then he stepped back, hands falling to his sides. "I think it's fixed," he said quietly. Claire turned her head to look at him. He was close now, closer than he'd been in days. Their eyes locked. Neither smiled, neither moved. Her voice, when it came, was soft. "Evan, I know," he whispered. "I'm not doing anything. I know," she said, cutting him off gently. Silence again. The kind of silence that holds too much truth. "I should get back to cleaning," Claire said at last, standing slowly, brushing imaginary lint from her shirt. Evan nodded, stepping aside. It was nothing, and yet it wasn't. Later that night, Claire sat alone on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The stars were faint, hidden behind a veil of spring clouds. She listened to the wind brushing the leaves and thought about how close they had come. To what? She didn't know, but whatever it was, they hadn't done it. And for now that was enough. Sunday brought a stillness that felt different. Not peaceful but reflective. Claire woke early, made coffee, and stood barefoot by the window, watching the light shift across the lawn. She felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Evan didn't come down for a while. When he did, he looked uncertain, as if unsure of where to place himself. They exchanged quiet greetings, their voices careful. Over breakfast, Claire spoke first. "We need to talk." Evan didn't flinch. "I know." She set her coffee down gently. "Whatever it is we've been circling, it needs a name, or at least a place. And that place can't be here." He looked up, his face unreadable. "Are you saying you regret anything?" "No," she answered quickly, honestly. "But I don't want something unspoken to start shaping how we treat each other." He nodded slowly. "I don't want that either." Claire exhaled. "We've always had trust. and openness. Let's keep that. But let's also agree not to create confusion for either of us. Agreed. It wasn't dramatic. Didn't have to be. It was two people who cared about each other choosing clarity over uncertainty. They spent the rest of the day in separate spaces, Claire tending to the garden, Evan reorganizing bookshelves. By evening, the air between them felt lighter, not because the feeling had disappeared, but because they'd faced it together. That night they watched a movie again, this time with a cushion between them. Their laughter was genuine. Their glances no longer lingered. The line was clear. Quiet. Necessary. Days passed. Not rushed, not heavy. Just simple, quiet days that allowed the dust of confusion to settle. Claire began walking in the mornings again, this time without her earbuds. She let the rhythm of her steps and the early bird calls fill the space. She didn't need music or distraction. Silence was no longer something to fear. Evan started taking longer showers, not to hide but to think. He reorganized the garage, cleared out old clutter, and returned some of Claire's books to her shelf without being asked. Their interactions grew easy again. Familiar. They didn't avoid each other, but they didn't hover either. There was a natural rhythm to their movements now, parallel, respectful, gentle. One afternoon, Claire sat on the back steps sipping iced tea. Evan joined her with a bowl of cherries, and they sat in companionable silence. "I'm glad we talked," he said after a while. Claire nodded. "Me too." He looked at her, not searching this time, just seeing. "You've always been my safe place." She smiled, her chest warming. "And you've always been my reason." There was no weight to it. No unspoken tension. Just truth. That night, Claire stood at the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair. Her reflection looked calm, steady. Her skin carried the faint bronze of early spring sun, and her eyes held something she hadn't seen in a while: clarity. She had come close to losing something sacred, but instead she had preserved it, not by pretending it hadn't happened, but by honoring the silence that asked to be named. When Evan returned from his evening walk, she was already in bed, reading. He knocked on her door lightly. "Night, Mom," he said. She looked up, her eyes soft. "Good night, sweetheart." The words settled into the room like a promise. When the light clicked off and Claire closed her eyes, she felt something rare settle around her. Not resolution, not forgetfulness, but something like peace.